Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So we have another Leah Thomas story. A new Leah Thomas out in Virginia is trying to dominate women's sports. A trans-identified male who used to compete on the men's team is now wanting to compete at Roanoke College in Virginia. And young women are standing up and fighting against this. They've seen what happened to Riley Gaines, Paula Scallon, all the other collegiate athletes who have gone before them who had the same fight. Inspired by that, these young women decided to take a stand. There was a conference at Roanoke College the other day, and many young women came forward and spoke out about their shock at being informed that a male was going to be on their team. And this is on their team, so, technically, they would have had an advantage having a biological male on their team. But obviously they didn't see it that way because they understand that this is going to undermine the integrity of women's sports. This is potentially another trans-identified male in their locker room. So it was good to see Riley Gaines supporting the young women yesterday. She was at the event and she spoke about her experiences once again. And the women that came forward have an all too familiar experience. It's very disheartening to see that this is still going on. While at the Olympic level, they have acknowledged that it is unfair for trans-identified males to compete against women in the women's female categories. But for some reason on a college level, it doesn't matter to them. On a college level, for some reason, these advantages no longer exist. Even though at college, you are an adult, you've gone through puberty, and clearly, Leah Thomas had an unfair advantage. So once again, this is potentially another trans-identified male who's going to take women's records. This is another trans-identified male who's going to take titles, accolades, scholarships, all of which he was unable to obtain while he competed on the men's team. Coincidence? And I hope this time at least this is another person exercising a fetish and has found a way to get into the women's locker room. I hope this time this is another case of that. So we had Riley Gaines speaking out at the conference. We had parents coming together to support the women, to support the female athletes. Riley Gaines said, "This is how parents need to show up to games and races and meets when their daughters have a male competing alongside them. Good on these parents for defending their daughters. The tide is turning." I'll be joining them for a press conference today at Roanoke College from 12 to 1. If you live in the area, show up to support these girls. This team is unique in their unity on this issue. I'm so grateful for their voices and fight. Enough is enough. And Paula Scallon said, "The Roanoke College women's swim team is standing together now and saying enough is enough. This is what we need. All girls and women standing together and standing up for fairness, truth, and women's rights. I can't express to you how proud I am of these ladies. And I encourage all women's teams going through this to look to them as inspiration. They are fierce leaders and I stand with them." And this team is unique because every member has made a stand against this. They have all come forward and said, this isn't right. Whereas before, from Riley Gaines' experience, she said that many women on the team were scared to speak out. Many women on Leah Thomas's team itself, that Paula was on, they were scared to speak out. Paula decided to come forward in recent years, and Riley Gaines spoke out from the very beginning. But those two are few at the moment, even now. But these young women have come out in numbers. They all spoke at the conference. I mean, the conference was over an hour because they all stood up and spoke about how concerning this is to them. And one thing that they all said was that this is a clear message that women don't matter. This is a clear message that young girls do not matter. Apparently on the Olympic level, they suddenly matter. But on the college level, they don't. In the eyes of the NCAA, in the eyes of American swimming, all of these sporting bodies who are allowing these rules. And people always say, why don't you refuse to compete? If you don't show up, there's no game. If you don't show up, there's no meet. Just refuse to compete. Well, these young women proposed that. And you know what their response was? The school's response was, the coach is allowed under NCAA rules to have a one-person team.
Multiple teammates, even I, have said how these last 5 weeks have, quote, felt like years. The team was put through demoralizing and exhausting meetings day after day for the result to be that we were not heard. We turned helpless. Every time we tried to speak up about our feelings, we were either shoved aside or expected to deal with all of our concerns ourselves. We felt completely ignored by our school, the place that is supposed to be our home away from home, allowed our feelings and comfortability to be neglected. We were instructed at one point to have a meeting to attempt to peacefully discuss our feelings about the issue with everyone present. The meeting time, as well as almost every decision made throughout this long, stressful process, was set and determined by the male athlete who wanted to join our team. When the meeting time was chosen, I was going to be the only captain fully present at this meeting due to travel commitments of the other captains. I voiced my concerns multiple times and asked if we could postpone the meeting a day or two so all captains could be there. I wanted to make sure that our captaincy was complete so we could stand for our team together in such an intimidating environment. My feelings, our team's feelings, and comfort were blatantly ignored, and only one athlete was prioritized. I felt unheard and unseen. Our comfort was undervalued and discarded. We tried numerous times to ask the school for support, but each and every time we were told to deal with it ourselves or told nothing at all. The school refused to send out any information to our parents, and we were informed that even if our entire women's team decided to stand together and not swim and emphasize the unfairness that was happening, our coach would be allowed to have a one-athlete swim team. A one-person swim team. That information alone was the most discouraging and disheartening of all. Our school was prioritizing one individual swimmer over 17 women whose only request was fairness. It was clear that the only way we would ever be heard was if we stood up. Enough was enough. The emotional drag had gone on way too long, and it was time to advocate for ourselves, which is why we are all standing before you today. The educational institution that should be protecting our Title IX rights stayed silent. Our government is not protecting women. The NCAA is not protecting women. They had a legal obligation to protect fair athletic opportunities for our female athletes, but instead, we were forced to practice and race against a biological male who removes fair sport for all of us. I'm standing up here today to ask these educational institutions to push back against the NCAA. I also call out to the NCAA itself, along with USA Swimming, to put back the fairness in all sports that women have worked so hard to get to where they have become. No athlete, coach, or school should have to go through what we went through. This needs to stop now.
So apparently, a one-person team with a trans athlete, with a trans-identified male, is better than a full team of women. So Roanoke College women's swim team captains reveal demoralizing struggle to try and convince trans student not to compete on their squad. A group of elite women swimmers at a Virginia university are demanding urgent action to protect their sport after a transgender student joined their team, leaving the coaches and athletes demoralized, angry, and unsure how to cope. The trans student informed staff at Roanoke College in September that she wished to swim on the women's team after sitting out the previous season while transitioning. The year before, the trans swimmer had competed in the men's team. The case bears strong echoes of that of Leah Thomas, who last year became the first transgender athlete to win an NCAA Division I national championship and set off a firestorm of controversy. So they approached the college and said that this isn't right. And the college told them to discuss it with the trans athlete, to discuss it among themselves, to try and appeal to the trans athlete and encourage them to do the right thing, essentially. And you know what that athlete told them? That they were having thoughts of self-deletion and that they were desperate to be included. That was the trans athlete's response. So again, putting these young women in a very difficult situation. If they proceed with this, they're essentially putting this trans athlete's life at risk. No doubt that's what they will be accused of. And I'm sorry, but why is that always the first thing that comes out of people's mouths when we're discussing these issues? Rather than discussing fairness, rather than discussing biology and what's right, they come out with the hyperbole and talk about self-deletion and issues like that. So the women can't even speak against it. So the women are silenced. No one cares about the feelings of the women though. No one cares about whether the women are having thoughts of that nature. They don't even care about the people who regret transitioning, who regret having mastectomies, who regret having hormones and puberty blockers and are now facing infertility. They don't even care about those people. Those are people within that community, are they not? Or at least were at one point. Never mind about those who regret doing all of that once they become older and understand the severity of what they've done or what has been done to them, they don't care as much about the mental health of these people as much as they care about pushing their agenda, as much as they care about winning the argument, pushing this ideology. This athlete is free to compete in swimming. This athlete is allowed to swim. No one is stopping this athlete from swimming. But what we ask is that you compete in the right category, because women matter too. So I commend these younger women for having the bravery to come forward and to take a stand against this, and for being united, because it doesn't help when you have women who are all for this, female athletes who are encouraging this, promoting the downfall of their sport.
What politicians and unelected ideologues and the authority figures at Roanoke College are doing is actively working to undermine Title IX by allowing females to be displaced by males who merely claim the identity of a woman. And in doing so, they're sending a clear message to all girls and women. And it's a message that says we don't matter. A message that says our ability to give consent in areas of undressing is irrelevant. Because again, we're being kind and inclusive, and that's much more important. A message that we're not worthy of recognition. A message that we simply exist to validate the feelings and the identity of males. And a message that says if we don't do so with a big smile on our face, then we're hateful bigots. Allowing males to compete on a women's team is and always will be unfair. And the burden should not be placed on female athletes to convince their schools to accept this scientific reality. But that's where it is being placed. And we as women, we're being silenced. Our universities and institutions are gaslighting and emotionally blackmailing us into making us feel like the oppressors. They want us to feel guilty for demanding fairness. There are so many tears and so many frustrated women in sports right now, and too many aren't visible. We know rules like these aren't fair, and it really only takes common sense to see it. And it shouldn't have to take bravery or courage to speak up for the fair treatment of women and girls. And if leaders cannot find it in themselves to do that, then we need different leaders.
Hello, my name is Julian Amaro, and I'm a sophomore on the women's swim team. I started on a competitive year-round swim team when I was 14. I started late in this sport, but that doesn't mean I love it any less or that I should have to accept being treated as if my participation isn't important enough to warrant fair sports. I am grateful for these amazing women who surround me, and we all want what is best for the sport and the future of women and girls in sports. That is why I'm here today. I believe that fairness in the sport can be achieved if policies can be put in place across the board to protect women and girls at every level. What happened to us was wrong. We should never have had to go through this. We were told to set aside our feelings, our competition, and our team because it would be the nice thing to do. Roanoke College is a great school, but every school is in a terrible position where they're having to choose to tell their female athletes to step aside. The NCAA is demanding that athletic departments and presidents cannot defend the right of their female students.
So as they so eloquently put it, under the guise of inclusivity, they are excluding women from their own sports. It does seem that the college's hands are tied because the NCAA have allowed this. The NCAA, for some reason, are not taking the example that Olympic committees have taken. So this is on them. All the stories we've heard about locker rooms, the stress that these women have been put under, undermining all of their achievements, all of their hard work, that's on the NCAA. And they will have to be held accountable and they will have to be held responsible. So a member of the male swimming team decided to take some time off last year to transition. And word got out that this is what was going on. The previous year, this was somebody who was swimming on the men's team, actively competing on the men's team. So they took last year off to transition and now have returned as a woman. The swimmer was strong, finishing as a male, 9th in the 500 freestyle in their conference, Division 3, Old Dominion Athlete Conference, and 8th in the 100 fly. So you mean to tell me this person is not going to completely annihilate these women? I mean, if somebody who was 462 can dominate the women's team, after a year of taking hormones, this person's all of a sudden going to be at the same level as the female athletes, and it's going to be fair. By comparison, Leah Thomas was 462nd as a male in her division, Division 1. So under the NCAA rules, a person must have been on hormones, testosterone suppressing treatment for 12 months. And they must do a serum test, a testosterone serum test, to make sure that the testosterone is not at the maximum level. But these rules are inconsistent. Ultimately, you just have to be somebody who claims to be transitioning, have been on hormones for 12 months. But that doesn't take away all of your advantages. It absolutely doesn't take away all of your advantages. Maybe your testosterone is lower than the maximum level allowed, okay. But it's still going to be an advantage to you compared to the women, compared to the naturally born females. So the International Olympic Committee in November 2021 said it was up to individual sports to determine their own rules and abandon their previous stipulation that trans women suppress their testosterone levels for at least 12 months to compete. So the NCAA, they were following the International Olympic Committee's rules. So now they're saying that each sport can make up their own rules. So when it comes to the USA Swimming, they've decided that it's not fair. We know it's not going to work. We don't want to ruin our sports. But at a college level, they're still saying that it's okay. And let's be honest, are people going to want to see that? A man who identifies as a woman dominating, women's categories. Are people actually going to want to see that? It would have destroyed women's sports. It would have meant that no one watches it. At first, yeah, people who find it amusing would watch it. But after that, no one's going to watch that. So Gallagher and Mullins, the two captains, they knew the trans swimmer personally before transitioning, while this person was just a regular guy. They knew this person. They both knew the swimmer was strong and extremely competitive and were deeply concerned that they would not stand a chance against them. Of course not. Gallagher said it was a pretty big elephant in the room. Pearson explained, "The swimmer last year informed us of their transition. Okay, and all very supportive. We were like, yes, do what makes you happy." So clearly these girls are not transphobic, they're not bigots. They actually said that, they were supportive of this person at first. Until they began to realize that certain needs and wants conflict with women's rights. Until they realized that it was their rights that were being affected. Until they realized that it was their sports that was going to be affected. So there it was, honestly. That meeting was very powerful for us to walk out of there and understand we're all on the same page, because we have other people on the team who identify in the LGBTQ community who were sitting there, right there with us. So there you go. Because this is about fairness. It's not about people being bigots and people thinking that certain people shouldn't exist and all this hyperbole that's put out there. It's not about trying to exclude anybody from competing. This person was perfectly fine competing on the men's team. They had access to the sport that they love. So this person is not being excluded from competing. But of course, the issue is competing on the right team, competing in the right category, as not to infringe on the female categories and to undermine women's sports. Okay, so they've seen this person in action in training. They had their first training session, and Pearson has tied for the women's record in the 50 freestyle. They said this trans individual in training, after being on hormones for a year and not swimming because they weren't competing, comes in the training session and does a low 24. And the record is 23.93. So in training, after not competing for a year, this trans individual got close to the record, near enough equaled the record in a training session. So, that's a little sign of what's to come. And it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good for the female athletes. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video.